Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is Dr. Richard Arjun Kaul, and I'd like to thank you for logging into my video internet show. Today I'm talking to you from New York City, and it is July the 18th, 2015. Now, over the last 3.5-4 years, as I've talked about in other videos, I've written thousands of articles, essays, dissertations, books, and one of my creative inspirations has always been Oscar Wilde, and he was able to very cleverly come up with phrases and pieces of verbal wisdom that coined and reflected aspects of human nature. So I wrote a piece entitled, "There are only two tragedies in life. One is not getting what one wants, and the other is getting it." The incisive brilliance and brevity of Oscar Wilde resulted in volumes of famous quotes that communicated with minimal effort the frailties and ridiculousness of the human condition. Jailed for his open expression of homosexuality, some of his best works emanated from his jail cell at Her Majesty's Prison, Reading. Wilde was able to crystallize and communicate with a caustic humor the absurdities of human behavior, while suggesting poetically pragmatic solutions that cut mercilessly through the false niceties of Victorian society. The above quote is one of hundreds and accurately describes the contradiction and confusion of human nature. Man will expend an extraordinary amount of effort chasing a goal that he perceives to be of great value, only to be disappointed upon capturing the prey. The amusing thing about this aspect of human behavior, perfectly coined in the above phrase, is that despite the number of disappointments his ventures bring, he continues on the same never-ending cycle, hoping that one day he will be proved wrong. The aspect of the chase that appeals to his primitive nature is the self-confirmation that he is in possession of the ability to achieve his personal goals, thus confirming his validity and bolstering his ego. The actual capture of the prey is invariably anticlimactic, and in a surprisingly short period of time, his interest wanes to the point of abandonment, to be replaced by yet another quest. This is the journey of man. The chase, the catch, and then the loss of purpose. A man without purpose, that takes no risks, does not challenge life, will inevitably leave this dimension overflowing with regrets. The things we chase in life are fueled by our desires, which are, in fact, the experience that we all fundamentally crave. Whatever material entity we think we want, it is not the actual entity our soul desires. It is, in fact, the moments in between taking the decision to chase and procuring the prey that constitute the most memorable segments of our existence. Oscar Wilde knew this well and lived his bohemian lifestyle, fully understanding the frailty of the material world and vigorously immersing his talents in the writing arts. This activity occupied his fertile mind and led to some of the greatest literary works of the 18th century. His irreverence and distrust of the Victorian system prompted his frequent outbursts of sarcasm and cutting wit. As well as being an accomplished author, raconteur, and poet, he unwittingly became one of the Victorian era's most respected social commentators, displaying his acerbic wit and probing intellect in the dissection of what would now be considered odd social interactions. His ability to acutely observe the mating games of the Victorian male and female most likely led to the above expression, as it became evident over time that once the man had completed his conquest, his real tragedy then began. A lifetime of misery stuck in the sinking sands of marriage. The wisdom of Oscar Wilde is the distilled version of the millions of voluminous self-help books that waffle on in endless chapters with no real point or defined message. I would suggest that anyone in need of emotional, spiritual, or cultural guidance spend some time with the writings of this man. He humorously analyzes human behavior with short, poignant pieces that are remarkably rememberable. Getting it sounds so final and somewhat depressing. I think most people would agree that their emotional state during the chase or during the construction of any project is one of elevation and joy, with the childlike expectation of completion. Completion, however, is invariably anticlimactic, and unless you have the New York Symphony Orchestra announcing what a good job has been done, it is not unusual for the participants to feel a sense of depression. After all, their purpose for the time has come to an end, and this really drives home the point that Oscar Wilde was indirectly making, which is that joy is most experienced during the process of getting something, with the something being almost irrelevant. There are, of course, more than two tragedies in life, but what Oscar Wilde has done, or did do, with this expression is essentially classify the entirety of human experience into two categories. His gift of communicating the complex via brief statements and at time dictates reflects the rapidity with which his mind processed events, concepts, actions, and then produced pieces of wit-filled wisdom that have survived the ages. There can be no doubt that his own personal challenges, and particularly the persecution he sustained as a consequence of his homosexuality, honed his oratorical and literary skills. For quite often, great writings require great loss. There are, of course, many lessons for us in his words of guidance. The above expression is essentially saying that anything we chase to possess becomes almost valueless the moment we seize it. This, on the surface, seems an oddity, but if one scratches the facade of human behavior, it becomes clear very little is actually needed. Food, water, shelter, and some companionship. And what most individuals think they need occurs as a result of social conditioning. The environment in which humans develop generally dictate the things that the individuals perceive that they want. An example of this is the excessively consumerist society that exists in Europe and North America, where the interminable cycle of material acquisition perpetuates a condition of permanent dissatisfaction, for there is always the next car, house, or cell phone to be colonized. I wrote that piece, as I said, a couple of years ago, and the thing about Oscar Wilde that I always admired and inspired me was his ability to challenge authority, his ability to communicate that, and the humour with which he did it. Now, I've talked before on other videos about what I refer to as the Book of Life, and it's this, again, Krishnamurti, think on these things. And I suppose next to Oscar Wilde, his writings have been very instrumental in my own journey. And when he was giving his talks, he would generally give them out in the open under a tree with his students sitting around, and it was organised in a question and answer format. And one of the questions that he was asked one time by one of his students was, what is self-knowledge and how can we get it? And he answered. He said, do you see the mentality behind this question? I'm not speaking out of disrespect for the questionnaire, but let us look at the mentality that asks, how can I get it? For how much can I buy it? What must I do? What sacrifice must I make? What discipline or meditation must I practice in order to have it? It is a machine-like, mediocre mind which says, I shall do this in order to get that. The so-called religious people think in these terms, but self-knowledge is not come by in this way. You cannot buy it through some effort or practice. Self-knowledge comes when you observe yourself in your relationship with your fellow students and your teachers, with all the people around you. It comes when you observe the manner of another, his gestures, the way he wears his clothes, the way he talks, his contempt or flattery, and your response. It comes when you watch everything in you and about you and see yourself as you see your face in the mirror. When you look into the mirror, you see yourself as you are, don't you? You may wish your head were a different shape, with a little more hair, and your face a little less ugly. But the fact is, clearly reflected in the mirror, and you can't push it aside and say how beautiful I am. His words of wisdom and the words of Oscar Wilde, I think, for me, provided a platform on which I was able to understand myself and understand life.